Buying a van-based small MPV like Fiat Doblo has always been more about sense than style, but the improved fourth-generation version of this Italian 5 or 7-seat family-sized but still compact people carrier might surprise you with its sophistication.
Cars aren't always aspirational. Sometimes they're simply about getting the job done, practically, affordably and efficiently. Van-based MPVs are a good example of this rather refreshingly uncomplicated approach to automotive design. Models like this one, Fiat Doblo. European buyers first saw it at the turn of the century, and a lot of them winced. Like Fiat's original multiple people carrier, let's politely say that looks were not a strong point. But the Italians learned quickly. A smarter 2004 facelift was followed by a completely revised and, in its own way, rather smartly dressed third-generation version, launched in 2010 and substantially updated early in 2015 to create the Mark IV model Doblo that we're looking at here. As before, it's still very much based on a van, Fiat's Doblo cargo model, and as ever, the idea has been to make this very affordable 5 or 7-seat family package feel as much like one of those pricey, purpose-designed, trendy mini MPVs as possible. So there are smoother looks, clothing, sophisticated suspension, more powerfully efficient engines, and a smarter cabin. The overall result still clearly says sensible, but doesn't say it quite as loudly. Which is important given the way that this market segment is currently leaning. Newer entrants like the Ford Tourneo Connect models are showing that buyers here are often prepared to sacrifice a touch of practicality if the end result is slightly less utilitarian. Ideally, though, sensibly minded family buyers will want both things from a car of this kind. Class-leading space from a vehicle that won't cause embarrassment on the school run. Is this what Fiat has delivered here? Let's find out. You don't buy any van-based MPV expecting a stimulating driving experience, something that I've always thought was a recipe for a pleasant surprise. Vans, you see, stiffly set up as they are to carry heavy loads, can actually be quite fun to punt along, with commandingly raised driving positions and glassy, spacious cockpits. From a purely dynamic point of view, there ought to be a lot to like. Unfortunately, dynamic was not a word appropriate to early turn-of-the-century versions of this car, thanks to roly-poly handling and weedy, raucous power plants, with 0 to 60 miles per hour times extending up to the 20-second mark. If you weren't put off by the looks, then you probably would have been by the test drive. The thing is, though, few potential buyers of this Fiat seem to have cottoned on to the fact that things are different now. Much has changed since those early Doblo days. The Mark III model of 2010 introduced a segment-exclusive bi-link independent rear suspension setup, complete with dual-rate shock absorbers, high-performance springs and a rear anti-roll bar, all tuned for the ideal combination of ride and handling. It was, in other words, more sophisticated under the skin than many more expensive, more car-like, scenic or C-Max-style compact MPVs. You'd think that if Fiat were to take that approach and then refine it with improvements like a lighter, more precise gear change, a more responsive throttle pedal and better noise insulation, it'd have a very good product on its hands. And these are indeed the updates made to this Mark IV model Doblo, with, for me, the improved refinement being the most noticeable attribute. It's probably the thing that does most to make this vehicle feel more like a car and less like a van. The bi-link independent suspension setup does its bit in this regard too, pretty much delivering on its promises of a comfortable and forgiving ride. It's certainly no worse than that of many far pricier people carriers, and considering the high centre of gravity and the relatively skinny tyres, body roll is well controlled and grip quite reasonable too. Around the corners you could certainly complain the steering to be short on feel, but this aside, there really isn't that much else to moan about, considering the modest standards of ride and handling normally expected from this utilitarian class of car. On to engines. There are two, a 95 brake horsepower 1.4 litre petrol unit that you'd only buy if you were Doblo dealing on a budget, and the 1.6 litre multi-jet diesel power plant that almost everyone else would rather have. To be frank, the green pump-fueled 1.4 struggles a bit. A 0 to 62 miles an hour sprint time of 50.4 seconds en route to 100 miles an hour doesn't sound too bad, but in reality, on the move, the 127 newton meters of torque this petrol power plant offers isn't really very much if the task at hand is to move a fully laden 1.5-ton Doblo. Those looking at this car then should beg, steal or borrow the premium required for the diesel version that I'm trying here. It is, as I've said, 1.6 litres in size, the 2-litre multi-jet version of this car Fiat used to offer having been consigned to history, which is fine providing this unit's man enough to do the job here. It is. Here, 290 newton meters of torque propels you down the road as quickly as you'd really want to go, and in 105 brake horsepower 6-speed manual gearbox form, 62 miles an hour from rest occupies a reasonable 13.4 seconds on the way to a rather modest 102 miles per hour maximum that's restricted, no doubt, by this Doblo's barn door aerodynamics. So there's overtaking punch through the rev range that'll surprise more than a few of your fellow motorists, plus laid-back flexibility around town that you can enhance further on this 1.6 by opting for Fiat's automated 5-speed dual-logic semi-automatic transmission. On the auto variant, though, for some reason, you'll find the multi-jet engine detuned down to 90 brake horsepower, diminishing pulling power to 200 newton meters, and those performance stats to 15.4 seconds and 98 miles an hour. Even the most practical people like to dress smartly, something Fiat stylists forgot when bringing us the quirky original version of this car. Still, they've redeemed themselves somewhat since, with proof of that provided by the restyled looks of this much improved 4th generation version. Yes, it is still boxy. To be class-leadingly practical, it would have to be. But thanks to a more curvaceous shape, complete with a trendy floating roof and a large side glazed area, it's no longer an MPV you'd park up with a twinge of embarrassment. Most of the Mark IV model updates are to be found at the front, where the design team have added distinctive headlamps that sit below a more richly sculpted bonnet and sweep into a more boldly fashioned front grille, complete with its proud retro-style brand logo. Fiat's aim was clearly to create a more car-like appearance, hence also the restyling of this front bumper, the lower air intake and the fog lamp surrounds. It won't be enough to turn any heads, but it all does a lot to disguise this vehicle's commercial origins. Move to the side and these are inevitably more obvious, though the upward sweep of the window line adds a sense of purpose to the robust practicality epitomised by the sliding doors and chunky side rubbing strips. There are even blacked out pillars to create the floating roof effect I was just talking about, the kind of thing you'd expect to see on a much trendier car. Here I've got the standard roof version that nearly all buyers will want, but Fiat also offers a high roof option, something that so endears this car to Motability users wanting to get wheelchairs in and out. As well as a choice of roof heights, there's a choice of tailgates too. And if you've ever tried to use the one-piece upward-raising hatch that comes as standard with this car, you'll understand why. It's heavy to lift and in some situations, say a low-roofed multi-storey car park or a tight garage, can't be raised at all. Hence the attraction of the optional twin-glazed rear doors I've got here. Yes, they look more LCV-like, but ultimately, I think they make more sense. Open them up and you'll start to understand just why this Doblo is such a go-to choice for those prioritising practicality above all else in this segment. On 5-seater models out back here, there's a segment-leading 790 litres on offer. To give you some perspective, that's about 20% more space than you get in the rival Citroën Berlingo Multispace and Peugeot Partner TP twins, the next biggest options in the segment. On top of that, the space is pretty flexible too. There's an optional neat height-adjustable parcel shelf which can either hide what's in the luggage compartment in the usual way or be dropped to a lowered position. In that mode, it's capable of supporting up to 70 kilos, so the family dog doesn't need to be lumped in with your shopping and graze happily through it all the way home. And if you fold and maybe also tumble forward the second row seats, then that same parcel shelf can help you create a completely flat loading area. This can be vast, particularly if you go to the next stage and remove each of the second row seats completely. You'll need to be strong of back and have somewhere to store them, but if that's no problem, then you'll end up creating a removal vehicle style capacity of 3,200 litres. Now that's a significant 200 litres more than the rival Citroën and Peugeot products I just mentioned. This means your Doblo would easily be big enough to swallow 4 washing machines. Try doing that in a much pricier, more car-like Scenic or C-Max style MPV. Time to take a seat at the wheel, where a smart centre console and switchgear shared with other pricier Fiats mean that though the emphasis is on tough durability, you don't feel too hard done by, especially in a plusher version like this one with its climate control and leather trim for the steering wheel and for the gear knob. Certainly, with a few other well-chosen options, you could easily convince yourself that you were driving something more sophisticated. The basics are right too. The build standards achieved by the Turkish factory seem to be strong, and the quality of things like the dashboard, the upholstery and the seats will all impress those whose experience of Doblo motoring dates back to first or second generation versions. None of these things received much attention as part of the Mark IV model upgrades, though the instrumentation you glimpse through the 3-spoke height and reach adjustable steering wheel now looks a bit smarter. There wasn't much that could be done to improve the already high standards of interior practicality either. As before, there are numerous oddments compartments, including cup and bottle holders, a lockable glove compartment large enough for a laptop, and a handy shelf above the windscreen for stowing everything from mobiles to maps. Talking of maps, there's the option of adding a TomTom sat-nav screen that clips on to the top of the fascia above the stereo system, provided you pay extra for the optional Blue and Sound pack that also gives you Bluetooth and USB connectivity. Via this Blue and Me technology, you'll be able to listen to music, navigate and make phone calls simply by issuing voice commands or by using steering wheel controls. Front seat folk then are well looked after. But how will the family fare further back? It's space you access via extra large sliding doors, so there's no need to worry about the kids denting adjacent cars as they spring out when you're tightly parked at the supermarket. Once inside, a class-leadingly long 2.75 metre wheelbase means that there's space for 3 adults in the back for short to medium journeys, provided they're on reasonably friendly terms. Plus, their headgear can be as elaborate as the lofty roofline will allow. Look around you and there's some evidence of Fiat's desire to make this more than just a glorified van. You don't normally get proper electric windows on sliding doors, for example, but they can be fitted here. It certainly feels big in here, large enough, in fact, to house more than 3 rear seats. Fiat's designers thought that too, hence the family pack option of a pair of folding occasional use extra seats that clip into the cargo area and play a big part in creating the 30 possible seating configurations you can potentially have in this car. These rearmost chairs aren't that easy to get to. And once you get back here, you discover legroom restrictions that make these chairs better suited for kids. Still, the lofty roof height means that adults crammed back here for short journeys will feel less claustrophobic than they would in the very back of many other 7-seat C-Max or Scenic-style compact MPVs. The extra chairs come with these neat opening rear quarter lights too. Doblo pricing sits in the £13,500 to £19,000 bracket, with the range based around 2 engines, a 95 brake horsepower 1.4 litre petrol unit and the power plant that most will want, a 1.6 litre multi-jet diesel. Those diesel variants are priced from around the £16,000 mark and put out 105 brake horsepower if you order yours with manual transmission. Pay the £800 premium Fiat asks to get your Doblo diesel with dual-logic automatic transmission though, and you'll find the multi-jet unit detuned to 90 brake horsepower. A significant number of Doblo buyers will want to find an extra £830 to equip their car with the family pack that gives you the extra third-row seating I've been trying here. And most buyers of the diesel version will also want to find the extra £200 necessary to get the Eco Pack with its engine stop-start system, which lowers CO2 emissions and improves fuel economy by a small but significant amount. As for rivals, well, let me try and give you a feel for your options here. Basically, the alternatives really fall into three categories. First, you could compare this model to a more conventional car-like 7-seat compact MPV like, say, a Ford Grand C-Max or a Citroën Grand C4 Picasso. These kinds of people carriers are more obviously less boxy and van-like, but diesel versions of them are priced way over the £20,000 mark. In contrast, you can, as I've said, get your family up and running with a diesel Doblo from around £16,000. That's quite a difference, especially given how much more spacious this vehicle is. At the other extreme, there are, as you might expect, proper compact commercial vehicles out there with seats and windows, van-derived products that don't even pretend to be car-like, but effectively aren't much different to what's on offer here. So, models like Nissan's NV200 Combi, Volkswagen's Caddy Life or Mercedes Citan Travelliner could all potentially be on your radar if you're clued into the market and you want really no-nonsense family transport. Vehicles of that sort aren't cheap though. In comparison to the cost of this Fiat, you can expect to pay anywhere between £3,000 and £5,000 more for an equivalent version of one of the models I've mentioned. Nobody ever said vans were cheap. I said that there were three categories of potential rivals. It's the third one that's really most relevant to this car, that of van-derived compact MPVs that, like this Doblo, have been properly developed for and targeted at the passenger car market. This segment has long been dominated by Citroën's Berlingo Multispace and its brand stablemate, Peugeot's partner TP. The only real directly similar opposition coming from Ford's Tourneo and Gran Tourneo Connect models. This Fiat is priced directly against the Citroën and the Peugeot and provides buyers with about 15% more space inside than either of those two French contenders can offer. In comparison to a Ford Gran Tourneo Connect, this Fiat is fully 20% bigger inside and can undercut a diesel version of the Ford by about £500. If, having considered all of that, you conclude that it is a Doblo that you really want, then you're going to need to know exactly how generous Fiat has been with the standard spec. There is a very basic pop version of the entry-level 1.4-litre petrol variant that gives you only the basics. Things like electric front windows, remote central locking and, of course, the two sliding side doors. Most Doblo petrol buyers, and all who opt for the diesel variant, will be buying in at the mid-range easy trim level, a spec including all the key things you'll really want. Outside there are front fog lamps and a less bargain basement look thanks to the use of body colour on the bumpers and on the electrically adjustable heated door mirrors. Inside there are useful features like a front armrest, an extendable load cover, height adjustment and lumbar support for the driver's seat, audio controls on the steering wheel and a handy rear power socket. Easy spec Doblo buyers also have the option of finding another £345 for air conditioning, a pretty important feature to have on a vehicle as glassy as this one. Whether it's worth finding another £2,000 or so on top of an easy spec to get the top lounge trim level we're trying here is more debatable on a car of this kind. The extra cash gets you power folding mirrors, rear parking sensors and dark tinted windows. Plus, there's a neat height adjustable parcel shelf, leather trim for the steering wheel and gear knob that lifts the feel of the cabin, rear electric windows, cruise control and an extra child mirror positioned above the ordinary rear view mirror, allowing parents to keep a better eye on what their little horrors are doing. And beyond that, well, the two most important options are mutually exclusive. Opt for the high roof body style that will be so appealing to disabled users wanting to get wheelchairs in and out, and you can't have what for me is the most important extra cost feature you can specify on this car, namely the family pack that for an extra £830 adds the third row seating that we have fitted in our test car, along with roof bars and rear window quarter lights. Other possible options that you might want to consider include 16-inch alloy wheels, twin glazed rear doors, metallic paint, a fragrance disperser, climate control, a full-size spare wheel and preparation for an alarm. Another useful extra worth thinking about is the clever Blue & Me hands-free system, which uses Bluetooth connectivity to let the driver make or receive phone calls or listen to an MP3 player using either voice activation or steering wheel controls. Combining this with the Blue & Me TomTom setup gets you a 4.3-inch colour sat-nav screen, which not only tells you where to go, but talks to the Doblo's in-car computer to provide information about your driving. USB and aux-in connectivity is also included. Inevitably, though, you can go further than that if you're intent on creating the ultimate family-friendly Doblo. The style-conscious can get everything from Italian flag badges to a Swarovski key cover, chromed door mirror covers and an ivory-coloured oddments pocket on the transmission tunnel. Active folk, meanwhile, will want to look at things like the Mopar rack attachments for canoes, windsurfers, skis and bicycles. I'd also want the optional luggage net to stop my shopping from scrambling itself on the way back from the supermarket, and the protective covers that Fiat can provide for the loading area and the rear seat. There's also a tow bar option, of course, plus a passenger seat that can fold into a table and a partition net for animals. In other words, you can really create in this car pretty much the ultimate in family practicality. Safety-wise, it's a pity that most models make you pay extra for the side airbags and anti-whiplash head restraints that these days you'd think would be standard on virtually every modern car. Still, all Doblos do get twin front airbags, ISOFIX child seat attachments and a TPMS tyre pressure monitoring system. Plus, of course, there are ABS brakes with electronic brake force distribution to make them more effective. And ESP stability control with ASR and MSR traction control and a hill holder clutch to stop you from drifting backwards at uphill junctions. Given that this Doblo can potentially take up to 7 people, the prospect of being able to return 51.4 miles per gallon on the combined cycle and emit 145 grams per kilometre of CO2 in this 1.6-litre multi-jet 105 brake horsepower manual gearbox model might seem quite reasonable at first glance. Go for the detuned 90 brake horsepower dual logic automatic version and the figures there 56.5 miles per gallon and 133 grams per kilometre of CO2. Unfortunately for Fiat though, rivals with more modern engines can do much better. Hence the Italian brand's decision to offer Doblo diesel buyers an extra cost eco pack, including a stop-start system that cuts the engine when you don't need it, either stuck in traffic or waiting at the lights. On a manual multi-jet diesel variant like the one I'm trying here, this improves this Fiat's figures to 128 grams per kilometre and 58.9 miles per gallon on the combined cycle. To be frank, the company really needs to make this pack standard, because even with it fitted, a diesel Doblo is still about 10% thirstier and dirtier than directly competitive blue HDI engine Citroën Berlingo Multispace and Peugeot partner TP models. Go for the cheaper 1.4-litre petrol version of this Doblo and you'll also get a set of running cost returns that are a little behind the pace in this segment. Expect 39.2 miles per gallon on the combined cycle and 165 grams per kilometre of CO2. Still, get the right deal up front on this Fiat and you might easily find you can cover any annual running cost difference that could create. As a user, you can do your bit too. A standard gear shift change-up indicator should help owners get somewhere near the quoted figures on a day-to-day basis. But if you want a little extra help in that regard, there's the option of a clever Microsoft-developed Eco Drive system, which gathers information on vehicle efficiency and driving style. The driver can download this onto a normal USB stick, so you can load it into your home PC and get tutorials and help on how to drive more efficiently. In fact, Fiat reckon that it can improve fuel economy by up to 15%, which would save the average driver between £105 and £175 a year in fuel costs. Link EcoDrive to the optional Blue & Me TomTom system and you can get real-time information as you drive. And should your tank begin to run dry, the sat-nav will even automatically show you directions to the nearest fuel station. Multi-jet engines should be cheap to maintain too. Engine inspections are needed only every 21,000 miles. What else? Well, there's a 3-year, 100,000 mile warranty, and insurance groupings start at Group 5 for the petrol 1.4, rise to either Group 7 or 8 for the dual-logic 1.6 multi-jet diesel model, and culminate at Group 12 for the manual gearbox 1.6 litre multi-jet derivative. More than 1 million Doblos have been sold since the turn of the century. And after a few days with this sensible 5 or 7-seater, you can begin to understand why. Earlier versions of this car sold on practicality alone. They were cheap, practical, and not a lot else. In more recent guises, though, this Fiat's curvy boxiness hides a remarkable amount of sophistication. Sophistication is a word I'd never thought I'd use in connection with this car, and it's something that makes you question the need to spend thousands more on a more car-like compact people carrier that, though more fun to drive, will certainly be smaller and a lot less versatile. Even against rival van-derived compact MPVs, this Fiat stands out for its sheer practicality, the choice of roof heights and tailgates, and that clever dual-height parcel shelf. They're things that many competitors just don't think to offer. Of course, if image matters more than practicality, then you'll need to look elsewhere. This Fiat unapologetically focuses on space and sensibility. Spec yours correctly, though, and you can get all of that in quite acceptably smart packaging that's been much improved with this 4th-generation model styling enhancements. If that's enough to convince you to try this car, then you might conceivably find that its practical charms will grow on you. Fiat claims to understand families, and after driving this one, I'm inclined to believe them.